John Stapleton.
Rohan is a secretary. Terry here is in the car trade, and they both share one thing in common. They say they have been abducted by aliens. Can it be true? Good morning. UFOs, flying saucers, aliens from another planet. We have an audience this morning of people who believe in close encounters. We also have people here who say it's all a load of nonsense. Whatever the case, it's a fact that around the world there's a UFO sighting reported every 2 minutes. How would you react if you saw something like this? Or perhaps like this? And don't laugh. It could happen to you, maybe even today. At least that's what you think, Rowan, isn't it? Tell us about your close encounter, the aliens that came into your life.
Well, I've seen lots of different UFOs, 4 different types on lots of occasions. And then a couple of years ago, in the early hours of the morning, I woke up and found my hallway light on. And I thought it was the person I was living with at the time who'd left early to go to work. But in fact, when I called out to him, this thing shuffled into my bedroom.
Describe this thing.
It was, my bed was on the floor at the time. It was a futon bed, so I was on the floor. I can't really say how tall it was. It was skinny, had long legs, long arms, and a larger head. But at the time, I didn't really take in what it looked like. I was more terrified.
Did it have a colour?
It was dark. There was only light from my hallway, so it was in silhouette, you know, sort of shadow.
Did it speak?
No, it reached down and touched me with a long finger and sort of touched me on the back of the neck. And I was completely horrified. My heart was sort of thumping, and then I fell backwards. I felt as though I was falling backwards.
How did you know this wasn't a nightmare?
I don't, 100%. Just to be perfectly honest with you. I have no definite proof. I just believe that happened.
But this, is it the only visitation you've had by...
No.
An alien? Or something you might think is an alien?
No. There's been other experiences. A couple of years before, I found myself floating in a motel room, and I felt as though someone was holding my arm and guiding me up. And then I found myself lying on a metal sheet, surrounded by these beings with bright lights in my eyes. And it was a very strong difference between the darkness of the motel room and the brightness of where I found myself.
And how did you explain that when you woke up?
I didn't. Just put it down. I spoke to people who had experiences and described it because I didn't know the details of what they looked like until I had that experience, and I described it, and they said, well, yes, it matches.
Tell me about the aliens in your life.
Well, I've had aliens around me all my life, since I was very young and I can remember. They're tall, blonde, very clear blue eyes. They've taken me on board a ship and they've operated on my back.
How do you know?
I know, it happened. They took me from a bed. I damaged my back badly. I was due to go in hospital to have x-rays on it. And they came and they took me in the night into the ship. They laid me down on my stomach and they just stared into my eyes and they operated on my back. The next day, I got up and went into work. I hadn't been able to work for 6 months. And I know that they've done it. There's other things that they've done. When people are in hospital and they're very ill, and I go to a hospital to visit anybody, they're always there and they always take care of people. And I see what they do.
When you tell these stories to your mates, I suspect they'll say, Terry, you're a lovely lad, but you've had a drink.
Not at all.
Or you're off your rocker.
Not at all. Because they've experienced things themselves, what's happened to me. And they've had children that have been in comas, they've had diseases, cancers, all sorts of things. And these aliens have been there and they got them better. And they would sit here today and tell you exactly the same.
Terry? How?
That I don't know. There's no, who knows? I know that I've had them, I can remember being born. And I can remember being on a planet, I don't know where it was, and there was a war going on. And we lost the war, and I got killed. And I was only a kid. The next thing is, I'm being born. I'm in my mum's stomach, in her womb. There's water around me. I was frightened. I was being born. I could see the light when I come out. I could hear all the people talking. And there were 2 aliens standing there. As I say, they're tall, they're blonde, they've got a dark complexion, they've got very, very blue crystal eyes.
Is it not possible to put it as politely as I can, that you have a very vivid imagination.
Not at all, because my wife, Diane, will tell you exactly the same and back up anything I say.
Is that
she's
true?
been there.
Yes, the hospital, they record Terry had to go back into hospital about 5 years ago because he damaged his back. Well, he hurt it, and it wasn't getting better. So when he went to Heatherwood Hospital, which is our local hospital, they found things in his blood that shouldn't really be there.
Like what?
There was zinc in there. There was
what?
zinc.
Extra zinc.
Zinc?
Yeah,
Zinc.
and there was things that whenever you cut yourself or when you're ill, in your blood, then all these things rush in to put that part right. I cut the top of my finger, there's a scar there. I held it together, and within a few minutes it healed. And there was about 18 specialists there, and they was convinced that I'd had an operation on my back because they said you should be in a wheelchair. Now, this operation took place about 25 years ago, and it was only 5 years ago that I had to go back to the hospital because the doctor said you've got a trapped nerve, so you'd have to go back and have some x-rays. Now, when I did that, and it came up on the screen, they said, where did you have the operation on your back? And I just didn't know what to tell them.
OK, let me just pause you there, because I know you can go on forever. You've got lots of experiences like this, and you know I've got lots of other people to talk to as well with similar experiences to recall. Thanks for talking to us. I'm sorry if I sound cynical, but I think that a lot of people watching this programme will take the same view. Who else has seen aliens? Hands up. Where?
My experiences are a little bit different. The first one did not involve seeing a nuts and bolts alien. When I was a child of 8 or 9, I had a light come into my room on 3 consecutive nights, middle of the night, woke up to see it, triangular or cone-shaped, small, on my bed, moved very slowly on a straight line up the bed, and there was an oscillating sound in the room as well, a muted humming vibration that came from everywhere in the room simultaneously.
It's a human shape.
No.
You see a
not at
light?
all.
I'm talking about aliens.
Yes, no. I saw the first one, but I heard a voice. I heard a voice that said to me, turn over and go to sleep when this light reached my pillow. And I found that I had to do that, and then I'd gone. And I woke up in the morning, I remembered everything, but that was it.
Let me ask you a
3
very simple question. Did you have a partner at the time?
No, I was 8 to 9 years old.
Oh, sorry. Did you have a brother or sister?
No, I was an only child.
You're an only child.
Very good. But where I actually
You had a mum
saw...
and dad, presumably. Is it not
Yes.
possible it was them saying turn over and go to sleep? Right, not to think
Absolutely
for mum or
not.
dad to say?
No, it wasn't their voice.
All right, tell me the second one.
Okay. Second one, I was in my late 20s, a few years after I got married. And to cut a long story short, they came into the house, broad daylight, morning.
How many of them?
I don't know. I didn't count them.
And what
It's
did they
so
look like?
surprising. They looked like people, like yourself. They were men. They had short back and sides
That's caused a laugh back there. I'll say, go on.
No,
Yeah.
suits, ties. I thought they were tall, but in fact I don't think they were, because the only thing that was strange about them was that they were standing and shuffling normally about 1 foot above the ground. And they taught me things in a language I don't understand, but at the time I spoke fluently with them, speaking, not telepathy, this. And they taught me the equivalent of about 6 years university course in a multitude of linked subjects: science, medicine, metaphysics, biology, you name it, it was all integrated like one subject.
In how long?
I don't know. It felt maybe like 1 or 2 hours. I don't know. I wasn't into judging time then, because I wasn't a UFO investigator at the time that I experienced this. That came many years later. They left, and everything they taught me had gone consciously from my mind, but I remembered the basic experience. And was I angry? Angry because I couldn't remember what they taught me.
OK, let me just pause you there, because I know you've got lots more to recount as well. But let me throw this to Chris, sitting at the back, listening cheerfully and patiently to all this. Do you believe any of it?
Well, I mean, I believe that these people have had some very unusual experiences, yes. I mean, the more important question is in this context, is this evidence that there really were aliens behind all this, or is it just another example of the kind of strange experiences that people can have, and which are basically generated by their own minds? I mean, certainly some of them fit classically into this pattern. I mean, we've heard about out-of-body experiences over there. Between 10 and 30% of the population have such experiences. It doesn't indicate that you're going crazy. It doesn't indicate there's anything to worry about. It's a fairly normal kind of experience. One that people tend not to talk about because they feel they'll be laughed at. The kind of experience that we've just heard about there, hypnagogic and hypnopompic imagery, to give the technical terms, are those kind of strange mind states that you go into in between sleep and wakefulness, where often people report they have very strange images, they hear things. It's very common to report strange, frightening beings actually present in the room. Because it feels so real, obviously doesn't prove that it is real.
OK. Gentleman, his hand up there. You're a member of a UFO society up here in Norfolk?
I'm a member of the Norfolk UFO group, yes.
What do you say to him?
What I say to him is that I've actually, on 4 different encounters over a period of 9 years, what I'd like to say is that I've actually got a physical defect on my right eye, which has been proven by the optician. He said the only reason that could have been possibly caused is by staying underneath a room light bulb for at least a period of 3 days, which obviously is laughable. Now, I know that it was the intensification of the lights from one of my third objects, which was a cage, a transparent cage, which is quite extraordinary in UFO terms. Now, this cage was sitting in a field about 15 feet away. I observed it on a normal duty at the post office, Kings Lynn office at the time. The cage, 15 feet away, had a pulsating bar going round the cage in a sequence of red, green, blue in that fashion, and I observed that cage for a period of 4 minutes. Now, at the time, I was not wearing glasses. This was 1983, in September. My first encounter was in May. But anyway, back to that one. Without the glasses, I started rubbing my right eye, because I was observing it from the post office vehicle, remember? And I stopped the vehicle, switched the engine off to hear any audible noise, which there was none whatsoever. I rubbed my eye quite violently because of the brilliance of the light coming from this object in the field, which, in my clarification, was more of a form of life rather than an actual craft, because of its transparency. I could see straight through it, no top, no bottom. So what I'm saying to you is that, as well as that gentleman over there has been talking about the tall blonde beings, at 21-year-old, I'd had no interest in UFOs whatsoever.
But you had
I had an experience that brought it on, which was 3 tall blonde people, and they were called themselves Lemurians. Now, a year later, I found out the Lemurian race has a attachment to the Atlantean race.
All right, I'm going to stop you there. You've seen, only because there's lots of people want to get in, but there's another experience of someone, a post office worker. I've got up here, a lady who identified herself to me a little earlier, as an airline pilot. Yeah?
That's correct.
Yeah. Who do you fly for?
Well, at the time I was flying for Luxair. At the moment I work freelance.
OK. When you were flying for Luxair, based in Luxembourg,
yes.
What experience did you have of this?
Well, basically, it was in the late evening. It was quite dark, and we were told that we couldn't take off at this stage because there was an object at the end of the runway. We were flying from Luxembourg to London. Eventually, we decided we had to get airborne. We sat at the end of the runway for 15 minutes with this object sitting out there, which was a bright light. So anyway, we just decided, right, we're going, and we got airborne. Now, we have ended up chasing this object up to an altitude of 25,000 feet. In fact, as I said, we're supposed to be going to London. We were now on our way to Berlin. And eventually, we decided that we had better turn around and head to London. Now, this object had been reported to us by the authorities on the ground, air traffic, radar, and all the rest of it.
As what?
As something. The controllers in the tower, who could see it visually, said it's there. We could see it in the aeroplane, that it was there. Radar could not see it. When we spoke to German radar, when we spoke to French radar, it was not there.
What did you make of it in the end? When you sit back now and recount this experience, I mean, there are all sorts of sort of meters in the sky, flashes of light,
That's right.
etc., etc. What's your rational explanation?
Well, I've been flying for 30 years, and professionally for about 28. And I've flown in all over the world, all sorts of aeroplanes, light aeroplanes, big aeroplanes, on ice, on snow, on the sea, low level, high level, up at 40, 50,000 feet. And once you start getting up high, you see different things from a different aspect than you do on the ground.
Did you personally have visual contact?
Yes. Now, the thing is, I know how an object flies. Objects do not hover in space.
OK.
Just hover there and then suddenly go
So you're
and gone.
mystified. Wendy, born skeptic, founder of the Skeptic Society. Skeptical about everything. Can you be really skeptical about that? Here's an airline pilot. I mean, I've got an airline pilot in the family, and I know his pals are the most rational, sensible, down-to-earth, if you'll forgive the pun, sort of people you could imagine.
But this is still somebody who saw something that they can't explain. That doesn't mean it can't be explained, only that it hasn't been yet. And I can't go there and investigate it, obviously, because it's now in the past. And that's one of the big problems with UFO stories is that the evidence tends to be disputable. that you don't ever seem to have, you know, a spaceship sort of land someplace where we can all go look at it and say, yes, it's here, and it's on the evening news. And the thing is, you know, a lot of people are not experienced in looking at the sky closely. They don't necessarily, I mean, I am not an astronomer. If I saw something weird in the sky, it might be because it was the first time I'd looked at the sky in 10 years.
But you have your doubts, you have your reservations.
But I would wait to see that whether...
All right, let me just go and have a chat with this lady here, Chris, and I'll come back to you, who's been waiting patiently. You're back to camera because you're embarrassed by what?
Yes.
By what happened to you, aren't you?
Yeah, I had a lot of ridicule because of it. You
had a lot of ridicule? Yeah, well, people will have a lot of ridicule, but, you know, I'm cynical about it, put it mildly, right? What happened to you?
Well, I was 14 years old, and I left my friend's house, and it was only like no further from her house to my house than going across the street. And I got this sensation that I was being watched, and I turned around, and there was this thing hanging in the sky. Well, naturally, I panicked, and I thought I was getting away from this thing.
What was it? How do you describe it?
It was like a saucer on edge. It was up like that, and it had several colors on it. The middle was yellow, and it had 3 outer rings along with it. And like I said, I panicked when I saw this thing. Well, thinking only 5 minutes had gone by when I ran into my mom's house, I found out after getting in the house I'd actually been gone 2.5 hours. And my parents couldn't explain what happened. They thought I'd gone.
And no one has explained this to you since?
Well, because of Roy and Ann, I've been able to be regressed, and I found out I was abducted.
Ah, you've been regressed. You've been
Yes.
you're under hypnosis.
Yes.
You've been taken back.
Taken back to that time, yeah.
And that's how you're able to recount the story now?
No, I knew I was able to remember the bit of seeing the craft, but what happened in 2.5 hours I was missing. I wanted to know what happened then. That's how come I had to record.
How significant, Chris, in your view, is the fact that some of the people who've seen these things, some of them, I stress, not all, have been through hypnosis and regression?
It's incredibly important because what surprises me is that there are still people who are hypnotherapists for a living who don't seem to be aware of the fact, which is well established beyond all possible doubt, that hypnosis is not a reliable way of finding out what happened. It's an extremely unreliable way. There's study after study after study which shows that people in those kinds of situations will confabulate, they'll make up stories, and particularly if the person who's doing the quote, the police do not use it. In America, the evidence is not acceptable if a witness has been hypnotised.
We've got somebody, you've been regressed, haven't you?
Yes, I have.
You have been regressed, and you are an expert on UFOs, you've written a book on UFOs. I mean, as a layman, it seems to me, I mean, he's more professional now, but as a layman, it seems to me that under hypnosis and regression, being taken back under hypnosis, it seems to me that your mind might be more open to suggestion, your mind might be more susceptible to this kind of influence or this kind of suggestion, and that, what I'm saying is, that's when you get this figment of your imagination.
Yeah, let me make clear that I wasn't regressed because I believed I'd been abducted. I was regressed simply to experience it so that I could understand it better. And the process is very interesting, and it is certainly true that I was able to check objective facts that I hadn't remembered but I knew were accessible. And on that process, 50% of the information that I came out with under hypnosis was accurate, which I'd forgotten. 50% were made up.
Yeah.
Exactly. So that's absolutely true. But what's important to stress here is that hypnotic regression in these cases is used in only about half of the cases, and the information that comes out from cases without hypnotic regression is almost identical. So it isn't really hypnosis that's creating the problem. I wish that it were, because we'd have a simple solution.
Okay, chap on the...
Contributing.
Yes,
Contributing, according to... Chap on the front row.
Yeah, John, I'd like to take up the point what the lady in the green said.
The pilot?
The pilot, yeah. Saying that you knew that a craft didn't suddenly hover and then disappear. Well, I had an experience when I was about 14, which I saw exactly the same thing. I'd like to make a point that also...
Have you been under hypnotic regression?
No, nothing like that whatsoever, John. It's just something was stuck in my mind, you know, all this while. About what happened when I was around about 14 or 15, with my friend, he'll verify this. We saw an object that was a big bright light that was as high up as what a plane is, and suddenly that was there, and then that went away, and then that flashed on again, and that was sort of, you know, a good food.
Well, there's no shortage of these stories, and I like Chris, let me make it quite plain. I'm not saying that you make, you know, I know you believe this.
I'd like to make the point, John, as well, that you know, while we are on the subject, I feel sorry for chaps like this and other lady at the back, etc. Not because I don't believe them, but the point is, how do you think people like that must feel when they're going to come round to tell someone and someone think they have a sandwich short of a picnic?
OK. Yeah, well, that's a suggestion people make, I'm sure, but he seems to live with it. You do this regression, don't you?
Yes, I do, John.
Now, what do you say to Chris? What do you, and perhaps, for the sake of the argument, me, who says you're putting things in people's minds. Now, half this stuff is, coincidentally explicable, but...
I'd like to know how many CE4 cases Chris has actually investigated.
How many what cases?
CE4, close encounters of the fourth kind. I mean,
why is that relevant?
Well, for him to voice an opinion, you would expect him to at least see a person who claims to have been abducted. Now, I've done this for quite a while now, and I believe under these conditions, under any UFO condition, the only piece of machinery that is going to work is the human brain. Everything else stops.
But if you've experienced something... Go on, sir,
have you found that people are having like a screen memory put in?
Yes.
For previous encounters?
Most definitely. And some of the outrageous claims that I've heard in this audience, the basic mechanic of any scenario, CE4 scenario, are always the same. You can discern between a genuine encounter. That's absolute rubbish. It's absolute nonsense.
Sorry, Chris, you don't know what you're talking
I would
about.
like to come back later.
All right, Wendy first, go on. I'll just get Wendy first, and I'll come back to you.
I've got 2 points I'd like to make. First of all, one of the really interesting things about hypnotic regression is that it's not just, you don't just get abduction stories. There seem to be a set of therapists who get benign and malevolent abduction stories. There seems to be a set of therapists who get child abuse stories. This has been a whole subject of massive debate in the States. And then there's a third set that get, whatever the third one is that I've forgotten now.
There's 3 different categories.
There seems to be, you know, so therapists seem to specialize in the past lives. That's the third one. So you see, that's the second point, is that the interesting thing to me about abductions is if you look back over the history of world folklore, there has always been something abducting people. It's UFOs now, but centuries ago it was the fairies in Ireland.
Yeah,
that's very interesting.
We're going to do one at a time. I'd like to bring in... Right, so we haven't been in for a tick. Lady down here, yes? Go on, and we're going to go to a break in a minute.
Some of these people who are very cynical, I do believe that you must have a broad, intelligent mind and not be gullible, accepting that. But some of these people, quite frankly, think in a series of very narrow-minded, black and white mindset frameworks. And this is self-limiting, so you will only ever be able to see your particular point of view. You won't be capable of looking beyond that. That's self-limiting, and reality is not made that way.
I've got to put this point to you, Chris, before we go to the break. Is it not possible that in 10, 15, 20, 100 years' time, there'd be an audience show like this and saying, do you remember those funny people back in 1994 who didn't believe any of this? I mean, they laughed at Columbus, you know? It is just possible, is it not, that they're right?
It is just possible.
Yeah.
I mean, they've laughed at an awful lot more people who actually turned out to be just plain wrong.
Sure. OK, we will take a break. I'll come back to it. We'll take a break. And when we come back, we'll be meeting, amongst others, Pamela here. Her story of an alien craft made newspaper headlines. It even featured in a book. This book. About unidentified flying objects. She will be revealing to us what really happened one dark night in Dorset in just a couple of minutes. Don't go away. Watch out. Tell us about it. Dark night in Dorset, right? A story that made the newspapers, got into this book here we've got here, yeah? What actually happened?
Well, I only recently found out about the book. It was years ago, and it was a dark night. And I think I'd been reading reports about flying saucers and things like that, so it stuck in my mind. And I was travelling back with the man that I later married. I'm now divorced. Lots of marriage. And I started saying I could see things, and it was a weird night, and I just got a little bit run away with, and I thought...
You were making it up?
When he agreed with me, I thought we were just winding each other up. Well, we never really spoke about it. And the next thing I knew, there was a report in the local paper.
He told somebody else, who told somebody else, who told the local paper.
I don't know whether he told the local paper
Whatever.
but they found out anyway, and there was a big splash in the local paper about this UFO and the trip over Egerton Hill.
Involving you and the man who was later your husband.
Yeah. And I think by that time I was getting really quite worried because I knew it was a wind-up, and I thought, I wasn't sure if he was believing it, and I couldn't say to anybody else it wasn't true or because it would have let him down.
Next thing you know, it's in this book, and...
Well, those two people came out to interview us, and I wasn't very keen on talking to them.
But why don't you tell them it was a load of baloney?
I did try, and as I sort of tried to back out of it, they ignored me more and more and took his version. Well, I didn't know who they were. I thought they were just from some newspaper or other to do with UFOs. About 2 years ago, I was in our local market, our second-hand market in Milton Keynes, and I found this, and I was looking through it, and I thought, what was something to read? At that time, I was travelling by coach up to London to university, so I thought, well, it would be quite interesting. When I looked through the index at the back, I thought, oh, somebody with the same name as me. So I turned to the page.
And there it is.
And I thought, oh, my God, that's the same story.
And
I
it's
know
the same
it's not
story.
true.
It's the same story. And as far as you're concerned, it's nothing more than a figment of your imagination.
Well, that's quoted as one of two stories, one foreign, one English.
All right, it may be exceptional, but I have to say it's a sobering thought, isn't it? Now, tell us what happened to you.
Well, my husband and I, was about 15 years ago, went to bed one night, it's about 1:45, and we were beginning to get undressed, and he said, there's an aeroplane and it's not going away. I think it's going to crash. And it went on and on for a few minutes. It didn't go any further, it just stayed. So he said, I've got to look out.
Is it outside the bedroom window?
Yes, it's going to hit the house opposite. He opened the curtains, and the first thing he said was, my God, look at that. And I thought, oh, we're going to see an aeroplane here crashing into somebody's house. So I ran to the bedroom window, and outside was a UFO, quite simply.
Shape?
Round, with lights, and we stood and we watched it.
How
and it
far?
must have been there for about 4 minutes. In the process, I thought, I wonder if there's anybody there. And 3 figures came to the window. I assume was a window. And I wondered, was there anything going to happen? And it seemed to come back as an answer. Anyway, the UFO went. I looked at my husband, he said, just don't say a word.
Now, presumably this raised the whole street. I mean, everyone in the community must have seen this.
My husband is a non-believer on anything. If you showed him a teacup, he would tell you.
All right, what did your neighbours tell about it?
He ran out that night, he said to me, just don't say a word, don't even speak to me. So we got into bed, and he said, I've got to talk to you. What did you see?
OK, let's just
He
skip
got up
ahead.
and he ran around the neighbourhood the next day like a banshee, and nobody had heard it barring him, and he didn't speak to them for a week because he thought they were all lying. And to this day, if you say to him there's no such thing as a UFO, he will say, I totally agree with you, but...
All right, let's just look at some photographic evidence. Jenny has written a book, and she has in this book all sorts of shots which are strange, to put it mildly. Can we see these, Gil? Can we see these shots? Now then, there we are.
Yes, I mean, that's a typical looking UFO, shaped exactly what you'd expect a UFO to look like, but it isn't in fact a UFO, it's a cloud.
It's a cloud
It's
formation.
a very unusual kind of cloud.
But you
It's
can forgive
commonly
someone for
mistaken.
thinking that's
Now,
a...
that's a fireball meteor or a bolide. I was talking to David Jacobs, the radio TV presenter, the other day. He's seen one of those with Shirley Williams a couple of years ago, and he didn't know until this day that that's what he'd seen, and it's very common in the night sky.
Easily explained.
Yep.
What's that?
That's a photograph of the moon shining through mist, and it creates a sort of UFO-like effect. I'm making these photographs visible because I want to make the point that 95% of all the things that are investigated as UFOs turn out not to be UFOs at all. We do make a lot of effort to find explanations, but that means that when we can't find an answer to a case, we have tried very hard.
The lady in front of you who saw the airplane outside her house, by the way, shaking her head saying
Nothing
no,
like it.
nothing
It was
like
so
the one I
much
saw.
closer.
No, OK. Let's just have a look at one more before we go.
Yeah, well, that's a debatable photograph. Some say that that, again, is a noctilucent cloud,
Yeah.
but there are others who believe it's not. It's a genuine UFO. It's a strange...
There are others that believe it's a hoax.
OK. There are but
There's always going to be dispute.
We've no official explanation for that last one.
But the point is, we've been talking about 2 different kinds of experience today. We've been talking about UFO sightings, which basically anybody out in the street at any time can see. And the airline pilot is not alone. There are, in fact, in the last 2 years, there have been about 10 close encounters involving British airliners over Britain with things. The Civil Aviation Authority have investigated them,
What
and
we
they're not
saw, John,
ordinary
was so
things.
close that it actually obliterated the houses opposite. It was so close.
Go on, then.
I'd like to ask him all a question. After all of these years of aliens supposedly making all the visitations, why haven't they set up a station here?
Yeah. Well, that's what Wendy asked.
Where is it?
The other thing is, if you can explain...
Hang on, Wendy. Yeah, go on. Go on.
If you can explain 95% of UFO sightings, why shouldn't we eventually be able to explain the other 5%?
Because there's been investigation done into that point by the Battelle Memorial Institute in America and by Japan in France, and they found that the cases that you can't explain are different from the ones that you can.
I want you to go to someone who's not been in so far. Yes, sir. Go on.
Can I just say, the biggest problem for ufologists worldwide is is the government cover-ups on the cases. The most famous case, which everybody knows about, is the Roswell incident of 1947.
Well, I don't know a thing about that.
Yeah.
I'm sure... I don't want to get into a long explanation, but let me just ask you this. Why should the government cover any of this up?
Mass hysteria, to avoid mass hysteria.
The same theme as the War of the Worlds that happened a lot of years ago on the radio broadcast across America. There was mass hysteria.
General on the back.
35 years ago, I was in the Royal Air Force, stationed not very far from this studio. RAF station called West Raynham, which is now closing down. On 2 occasions while I was up that unit, I saw mysterious objects. The first one was actual visual sight. Late one evening, walking back to the camp, strange bright light in the sky, travelled across, stopped and went straight up into the clouds. I mentioned this when I got back to my unit. They said, oh, no, don't say anything. They thought you've been on the barley wine.
Yeah.
The second time, I was in what used to be the GCA, Ground Control Approach Radar, and I spotted something actually going across the radar screen. At that time, it was an unheard of speed, something about 5,000 miles an hour.
Okay.
The RAF will not give any comment about incidents like that. Even today, they will not explain incidents.
Right, quick last word, we've got to end the show.
2 quick points. One, there's lots of evidence that even people who are trained observers, pilots, astronomers even, are often fooled by strange events which on closer investigation are explicable. Second point, it's a logical fallacy to say that just because there are 5% of cases that may remain unexplained forever, therefore that means they're extraterrestrials. It just doesn't follow.
Okay.
It means that we haven't explained
Most of these people are trained.
Very, very quick. Very, very quick.
Another dimension to this, in that it's... Oh, excuse me, I'm speaking, sorry.
Yeah, you have to be down fast at the end of the show.
Right, it's been happening to people since they were early children. Very, very early age.
Okay. I have to say bye-bye. Fascinating subject once again. See you tomorrow. Bye-bye. This morning.
Thanks, John.
Bye.